Welcome back to another Pirkei Avot text explication video essay with me, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm very excited as we kick off the fourth chapter of Pirkei Avot. We've done 52 videos on the first three chapters, and now we move on into the fourth chapter. We are now, as you can imagine, starting off the fourth chapter on the very first text. I'm particularly excited about this one because 9 years ago, I did a lot of research and writing into this text. So I have a lot to say about this. So this is not the typical length for one of these text explication videos. Get comfortable. This is going to be good. All right. So I actually printed this one out. I've gotten some feedback from some of you. Put the text on the screen. So I'm doing kind of old school. I printed it out, as you can see here. I have both the Hebrew and also an English translation for this particular text. I hope it's helpful. I'd love your feedback to see where we go. So as you can see, this actually, I'll show it in Hebrew, which is you have a 4-part, and you also have it here in the English. You have 4 parts as well. In Pirkei Avot, even though a lot of the first chapter was very structured in a 3-part structure, so you'd have a 3-part statement or talk about 3 different things, we have seen throughout Pirkei Avot a 4-part structure. It's also really common in rabbinic literature to do a 4-part structure, which basically works off of a 2x2 matrix, essentially. So we have here, this is a really fascinating structure. So I'm going to point out to you, I want to mention something really quickly at the outset. So there's 4 parts here, right? 4 parts, and they all are the same. I'm going to talk about it, then I'm going to read it, and then we're going to go back into it. So what we have here is basically Ben Zoma. This is, I should say this. Ben Zoma here, it's a statement of Ben Zoma, which literally translates to son of Zoma. Does he have a first name? Yes. So Ben Zoma, and there's another guy named Ben Azai. Both of them are just named after their fathers, but they actually have their own first name, which is Simon, or Shimon in Hebrew. Now Shimon, or here Shimon Ben Zoma, I guess it was a pretty common name. Ben Zoma is also notably not mentioned as a rabbi. There's no title associated with him. Also just simply Ben Zoma. But curiously, he does come up in the Haggadah at the Passover Seder. He is also known as he's a real famous. He's called a darshan. That it says in rabbinic literature, when Ben Zoma died, so too did the end of the darshanim. I want to say the midrashis, but they expounded. Right, he was the last of the expounders, as it were, the last of the great expounders, as it were. That's what he does in the Haggadah, the Passover Seder. He says not just the days, the days of your night doesn't, all the days of your life. It doesn't just mean the days of this life. It means the world to come. Okay, so that's him. That's Ben Zoma. Okay, but what he does here, he asks a question, he provides an answer, and then he gives a scriptural proof text to back up his answer to that question. So here we go. I'm going to put it on screen. I don't know if you can read it or not, but it's worth the attempt. Okay, here we go. Ben Zoma says, who is wise? He who learns from every person, as it is said, from all who taught me have I gained understanding. Who is mighty? He who subdues his evil inclination, as it is said, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules his spirit than he that takes a city. Who is rich? He who rejoices in his lot, as it is said, you shall enjoy the fruits of your labors, you shall be happy, and you shall prosper. Who is he that is honored? He who honors his fellow human beings, as it is said, for I honor those that honor me, but those who spurn me shall be dishonored. Now, one thing I do have to point out that you will see on here and in many of printings of Pirkei Avot, especially many of you have it included in your Sidurim. You might have a Sidur that has this, and there's an extra line. In Hebrew, it's right here. Ashrecha ba'olam hazeh v'tov lach la'olam haba. Okay. I'm sorry, v'tovlach ashrech. Okay, so we have here in the English, you shall be happy in this world, and you shall prosper in the world to come. Now, this would make sense that this would break down for Ben Zoma, as we said in the Passover Haggadah. He's the one who talks about all the days of your life is not just the days in this world, but even the world to come. So that would make sense. However, this doesn't. First of all, it doesn't fit with the structure of question, answer, scriptural verse. It's just literally, it feels extraneous. But more than that, it actually appears separately mentioned by a rabbi in the Babylonian Talmud a couple centuries later, And it seems to have migrated from that statement in the Babylonian Talmud and Tractate Brachot and somehow made its way ultimately, maybe by some scribe, someone who's writing it down, and they remembered this verse and they remembered what it was said over there in the Talmud and they included it here. But it's actually not part of Ben Zoma's statement. So I'm making that comment. It's actually, that's why it's offset here in the middle and here too. So I'm not going to talk about that. What I will talk about, however, is the rest of it. What I mentioned is really fascinating because the questions he's asking. So what are the 4 questions? I know we just had Passover, but what are the 4 questions? Who is wise? Who is strong? Who is rich? Who is honored? And the answers these are all, by the way, these are all questions that I think every society, every culture, everybody wants to know, because we want to know who's rich. We want to know who's strong. We want to know who's wise and who is honored. These are all important questions for every single society. The answers he provides are strange for every single society. He provides very curious answers. So, for the first one, okay, we're just going to go through all 4 of them in order. Ezehu Chacham, who is wise? It's not someone. So he says, someone who learns from everybody. Someone who learns from everybody. Now this is strange. This is actually, if you were to someone were to ask you, who's wise? It's someone that everybody learns from. Everybody can learn from this person. They have something that everybody can learn from. But this is the inversion. This is someone that he learns from everybody else. It's opposite of what one would expect. And the funny thing is, the verse he uses from Psalms 119 is, he who from all who taught me have I gained understanding. That from all who taught me have I gained understanding, which makes sense, except he's just using he's actually doing the same thing in answering the question as he does with this biblical verse. That's not even what the biblical verse really even means. So he's taking that out of even that context, which is kind of funny, but. The idea for Ben Zoma, I'm not going to focus a lot on the scriptural verse, but what's funny for Ben Zoma is that he is specifically inverting it. I think what he's intending to do is saying you have a humility about yourself and you're able to, no matter with whom this person, or as a wise person, no matter with whom a wise person is interacting, they're there and they're going to learn from that. They're going to learn from every single person. Even though clearly the model, I think, in pretty much every society is that the wise person is someone from whom everyone can learn. That there's always things that they have knowledge of that other people don't. So that's already funny, and we're getting off a really curious start. Now on to the second one. Who is mighty? Who is strong? Maybe we even say who is a warrior? Hakovesh es Yitzro, one who dominates or subdues one's will or one's desires, as it were. Now this is interesting. What's furthermore interesting is the scriptural verse that he uses to prove it. So I think if we were to say who is powerful, who is mighty, it's someone who can go and basically defeat anybody, right? Anybody. And it's very externally focused, right? Outwardly focused. They can dominate, they can beat someone else, whether it's something as simple as arm wrestling, real wrestling, or maybe with swords and actually implements a battle. But he says it's not an external. It's not an external focus. It's an internal focus, one who can control their own desires, as it were. Now, the funny thing is the scriptural verse, which he uses from Proverbs chapter 16, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules the spirit than that takes a city. Slow to anger is better than the mighty. Now, the slow to anger, which is basically a subduing of one's own desires, is better than one who is mighty. Now, that is, if we were to just think about the verse, one who is slow to anger is someone who is very different than one who is mighty, a gibor, right? That's the word he's trying to identify and characterize. So even in the verse, they are very explicitly different people, especially in the back half of that verse, which is one who rules one's spirit is better than one who subdues a city or conquers a city. So clearly in the biblical verse, these are two very different people, and yet Ben Zoma just collapses it all and says, no, really, that is one that is a mighty warrior. It's funny. Ben Zoma is clearly doing some funny stuff. I think any society who is strong, you might be able to quantify it, right? They're able to lift 5 sacks of corn or whatever measurement of strength. But this is certainly a curious move on his part. Now into the third one. Who's wealthy? Who is wealthy? I think every society wants to know who's got money, right? Who's wealthy? Who's rich, right? So he says, Hasamech bechalko. One who is just happy with what they have. One who's happy with one's lot or one's portion. Okay, this is really funny. And actually, it's very similar in some ways to what we saw in the second one, right? Who is mighty? One who doesn't conquer other things, but really conquers one's own internal aspects. So here, it's not an external wealth, but it's almost like an internal happiness, an internal wealth. Hasamech bechoko. If you're just happy, as it were, with what you have, you're rich as it is. Okay, now, this is very, very simply put. This is, first of all, this isn't even the only rabbinic opinion on this. In the Babylonian Talmud, we see an early rabbinic teaching in which we have 4 different views on who. It's the same question, exact same question. Ezehu Ashir, who is wealthy? And the fascinating thing we see there, guess what? They quantify. The rabbis are quantifying someone who has 100 fields, someone who has 100 slaves. It's funny because one of them says one who has a privy, an outhouse that's not so far, right? So, but at least there, those several rabbis, those handful of rabbis there in the Babylonian Talmud are explicitly seeking to quantify wealth in their times. Now, clearly from culture to culture, time to time, place to place, wealth will change. There are different barometers, different ways of gauging wealth and how rich one is. But what's fascinating is here, Ben Zoma is saying it's not an external thing, it's how wealthy you are on the inside. Okay. And by the way, the biblical verse, if you're wondering, is from Psalms 128. You shall enjoy the fruit of your labors, you shall be happy, and you shall prosper. Okay, that's lovely. Okay, you're gonna do your handiwork, you're gonna eat, and it's gonna be happy, and it's gonna be good for you. It's not really about wealth, although it is about the fruits of one's labors and eating and being happy. But at the same time, that's a weak response. Okay, and finally, the fourth and final one, which is Ezehu Mechubad. Who is one who is honored? Who deserves honor? Now, presumably, it's one who everybody honors, right? I think everybody would recognize how much we are to honor this person. Or maybe they did something, they achieved some accomplishment, or they are in some certain station or a certain rank, right? That's who we would expect to be honored. Not for Ben Zoma. He says, Ezehu mechubad hamachabed es habriot. So we finish off just the exact same we started, right? Just as we saw with the very first one, which is Ezehu chacham, who's wise. Not someone from whom everybody else learns from, but it's the exact opposite. It's someone who learns from everybody. And here too, it's not someone who everybody honors. Clearly, everybody's going to honor this person. No. It's this person who honors everybody else. Hamachabed et habriot, one who honors everybody. Again, it's another Ben Zoma inversion. And the scriptural verse he uses is from the first book of Samuel, which is Ki mechabdi achabed uvozi yekalu. For I honor those that honor me, but those that spurn me shall be dishonored. Now this is from God there. I honor those that honor me, which is interesting. That there's this reflexive honoring going back and forth. So this one maybe you could say there's a certain sense of imitatio Dei, of imitating God, of following God's ways, that just as God says here in the book of Samuel, I will honor those who honor me. So Ben Zoma reads this and understands this as talking about when one honors other people, they will be reflexively honored as well. Really interesting. And like I mentioned, the first and the fourth are, as opposed to wisdom and honor being recognized in the person, it's the opposite. And as part of the summary, I'll also say the wealth piece. The strength piece is not an outward strength, it's an inner strength. And similarly with the wealth, it's not an outward, like quantitative wealth, it's actually a sort of a qualitative happiness in one's life, almost an inner happiness. So Ben Zoma here in his interesting wisdom here, these are paradoxes, right? This is definitely paradoxical thinking. He's going, and by the way, this I think this is not specific to our time that this seems weird. I think even in his time, this is also peculiar. These paradoxes, that sort of, and paradox means opposite of thinking, right? He's thinking opposite against the way his culture thought about it, and certainly even for our day. And I think pretty much all four of these cut across all cultures as being paradoxical, against the common way of thinking. Now, whether they are the standard answers, right, the questions he's asking, who is wise, who is wealthy, who is strong, and who is honored, I think every culture, every society asks these questions. The answers he gives are strange not only for us to read of and hear of, but I think even in his time they were strange and weird. I mentioned even just for the wealth. We had several other rabbis who quantified wealth. And I think for the rabbis, Ben Zoma was definitely a curious thinker, but very interesting. And to this day, many rabbis, many other Jewish leaders reference these ideas or reference these answers of Ben Zoma to these questions, and they certainly help us think about these questions in different ways than we're used to thinking. So even though these may not be the standard answers to these questions, they certainly provide an interesting way of considering these questions. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope this was helpful. All the best.